Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuhu. Hope so you all are fine, good and healthy. Well, students, in the previous section we have discussed about nerve cell. Now we are going to discuss about the types of the nerve, as well as let's see that how much we are able to discuss about the brain. Okay, if we are going to discuss about the nerve, then what is basically the nerve? The nerve is basically made up of many of the axons. If you remember, a axon and S axons that were basically the processing from the cell body in the nerve cell, which we have learned before. Basically, a nerve is made up of many axons and they're covered by the myelinated, or you can say that covered by a fat sheet, and this is basically known as a nerve. If we are going to discuss about the types of the nerve, then there are three types of the nerve. The one is a sensory nerve, and this sensory nerve is basically made up of the axons of the sensory neuron. We have learned about the neuron in our previous section. The other one is the motor nerve, and the motor nerve is basically made up of the axons of the motor neuron. And the third one is the mixed. So basically the mixed is made up of the axons of sensory as well as motor nerve, and basically these mixed nerves are mostly present in the spinal cord or brain. So this was about the nerve in your syllabus. That is, the nerve is of three types: sensory, motor, and the mixed. And the sensory nerve is basically made up of sensory neuron, axons of sensory neuron. Motor nerve is made up of the neurons of the axons of the motor neuron, and the mixed nerve is basically made up of sensory and the motor axons of the sensory and the motor neuron. So now, students, we are going to discuss about the brain. When it's come on the brain, then basically the brain is one of the most major organ of the body, which is to control all the functions of the living organism. As well as you know that the brain is known as the president of the body. Which means that under the brain all the system is going on, each and everything is coordinated or controlled by the brain. So let's discuss about the structure of the brain, that how the brain is. Basically the brain is the perfect to control, like its structure, the way the brain structure is basically perfect to control all part of the body. So if you're going to discuss about the brain, then it is like that. The brain is covered, you can say the brain is basically covered into a you can say that into a bone. Like there's a bone which used to protect the brain, and that bone is basically the part of skull. That bone is basically the part of skull, and that bone name is a cranium. Basically the skull, the bony part of the skull which is actually covering the brain is known as a cranium. So the cranium is that bony part of the skull which is actually covering the brain. And now what, students, after that cranium, let's suppose this is the cranium which is covering the brain, and inside the cranium there are three layers are present. Basically three layers are present around the brain, which is basically protecting the brain, and such layers are known as a meninges. That is known as what? That is known as basic. Okay, so these layers which are present inside the cranium, inside the cranium, there is three layers are present which are basically protecting the brain, are known as the meninges. These meninges are not only protecting the brain, but they are also providing the nourishing. They used to provide the nourishment as well as the oxygen to the brain with the help of the capillaries. So these meninges are not only protecting but also nourishing the brain, as well as they are providing the oxygen through the capillaries to the brain. So students, there are some chambers. Chambers are also present, and such hollow chambers are known as a ventricle. These ventricles are actually containing the fluid, and this fluid also used to travel towards the spinal cord as well, the hollow area that is present in the spinal cord. And this fluid which is actually present in this ventricle of the brain as well as towards the spinal cord is known as CSF. That is known as what? CSF. And CSF is known as a cerebrospinal fluid. So this fluid that is present in the ventricles of the brain or ventricles of the brain as well as on the spinal cord, that is known as a CSF. And CSF means that cerebrospinal fluid. Okay, if you're going to discuss about the parts of the brain, then there are three basic parts of the brain, and that is what? That is like forebrain, midbrain, and hindbrain. So there are basically three parts of the brains are, and the forebrain is the most largest brain part, and it is further divided into three major parts. One is a hypothalamus, other one is a thalamus, and then there is the cerebrum. So this whole one is the cerebrum. That is what? This is basically the cerebrum. So cerebrum is the largest part of the forebrain. Well, first we are going to discuss about the hypothalamus. So what is basically the hypothalamus? Basically the hypothalamus is present just above to the midbrain. It is just, you can say that this is the hypothalamus and it is present above to the midbrain, as well as it is just below to the hypothalamus. So this is the hypothalamus and this is the midbrain, and it is located there. So it means that it is present above to the midbrain and just below to the thalamus. And the main function of the hypothalamus is that it is creating the link in between the nervous system as well as into the endocrine system. Endocrine, like it is actually a link between the endocrine chemical coordination and the nervous coordination, because the major function of the hypothalamus, it used to control the production of the pituitary gland. It used to control the production of the pituitary gland. So that's why it is considered as a link in between the nervous coordination system and the endocrine coordination system. Because students, the pituitary gland is considered as the brain of the all hormones. So basically pituitary gland is controlling the production of the hormones, and this pituitary is actually controlled by the hypothalamus. So that's what the hypothalamus major function is, that it carries link in between the nervous system and the endocrine system. Okay, so if you are going to discuss about the size of a hypothalamus, and that is just an almond, you know about the almond, that is just in the size of an almond. So you can see here that this is the hypothalamus and this is just in the size of the almond, and it is basically controlling the secretion of the pituitary gland. Okay, it is not only the function, but hypothalamus is also controlling the feelings. Okay, what kind of the feelings? Like sorrow, pain, pleasure, and rage, like to take revenge from someone. So this is basically these kind of the emotions and the feelings are controlled by the hypothalamus. Now let's discuss about the thalamus. So if we are going to discuss about the thalamus, then this is the thalamus, and that lies just below to the cerebrum and above to the hypothalamus. So the thalamus is just lying below to the cerebrum. If we are going to discuss about the function, then what are basically the function of thalamus? Then thalamus is one of the major function of the thalamus is that it is acting as a relay system. It is acting as a relay system, you can say relay system between the spinal cord and brain. So it is actually used to interpret the stimulations, and then it's used to become coordinate as a it is basically, you can say that it is a coordination in between the brain and the spinal cord. Okay, now whatever the stimulation is actually coming from the sensory organs like eye, ear, skin, except nose. There are 5 sensory organs, you know very well, and all the stimulation which are actually received by the sensory organ except not nose used to first enters into the thalamus, and then it is sent to the cerebrum. So it is first, these all sensory stimulations are first interpreted by the hypothalamus, and then it's used to send towards the brain, except nose. Basically nose have a direct contact with the cerebrum. So the hypothalamus, you can say the thalamus first used to receive the stimulations from the sensory organ, and then it used to modify these sensory, you can say, stimulation, and then it used to pass to the cerebrum. As well as the thalamus is also involving in the pain perception. Like let's suppose that you are feeling the pain, that will be felt by the thalamus, that how much severe pain you are feeling, or what is like the rank of the pain, as well as some kind of the conscious action, like which you are doing by your own in your full senses, like sleeping, waking. So these kind of the conscious controls are also under the thalamus. Now that we are going to discuss about the largest part, and which is basically the largest part. The largest part of the forebrain is the cerebrum, and we are going to discuss, and obviously it needs the detail. So let's see. Okay students, if we are going to discuss about the cerebrum, that is a cerebrum, then this is the largest, you can say that is the largest part of the forebrain. So you can see students, this is basically the cerebrum, that mostly we used to draw the diagram of the brain like that. So these two are basically the cerebrum, that this whole is the cerebrum, and the half part, you can say that there are two parts. So the cerebrum contains the two hemispheres, so that is basically known as two hemisphere. You can see one is this one hemisphere and other one is this hemisphere. So this is basically known as a that is known as what? Cerebral. That is known as a cerebral hemisphere. That is known as what? Cerebral hemisphere. So you can see that these two hemispheres are there. So this is basically known as a cerebral hemisphere. This is basically the largest part, as I told you before, that this is the largest part of the brain. This is the largest part of the brain, as well as it is controlling the skeleton muscles, like the way we are moving. So it is controlling the skeleton muscle. It is actually controlling our thinking, as well as our intelligence level, like how much we are intelligent. So this intelligence level is also controlled by that part of the brain, as well as our emotions or feelings are also controlled by the largest part of the brain, that is the cerebrum. So as I told you before, that the cerebrum have two spheres, that's why it is called the cerebral hemisphere. The interior part of the cerebral hemisphere actually contains the olfactory bulb. Okay students, so this is brain, and these are two hemisphere, and that is known as the cerebrum hemisphere. Now let's see the structure inside of this cerebral hemisphere. It contains the, if you are going to see the interior part of the hemisphere, then you will see that it contains the olfactory bulb. It contains what? It contains the olfactory. It contains the olfactory bulb, and this is basically receiving the message. It is actually receiving the impulse from the olfactory nerve. So do you know that what is, if you ever learned that, what is the olfactory bulb? What is the olfactory nerve? Basically that is a nerve which is receiving the message from the nose. So as I told you before, we have learned in the thalamus that except the nose, the thalamus is receiving the impulses from all the sensory organs except the nose, because nose have the direct, like nose is the, so the interior side of the brain contains the olfactory bulb, and this olfactory bulb is basically receiving the impulses from the olfactory nerve, and it is basically olfactory nerve basically carry the sensation of, you can say, smell. Sensation of smell. Basically the nerve which used to receive the message from the nose is olfactory nerve, and this olfactory nerve used to send the message toward the olfactory bulb. Okay students, now this was the most important thing. Now let's see that what the next is. Basically the cerebrum Cerebrum upper sphere, basically this is the cerebrum hemisphere. So cerebrum hemisphere upper layers are basically upper layer. There's a layer. If you're going to discuss about that layer, then this layer, the upper layer, is known as a cerebral cortex. That is known as what? Cerebral cortex. Basically, this cerebral cortex is made up of gray matter. Now, what is basically the gray matter? If you remember, then we have learned that there are some axons made up of myelinated, having the myelinated sheet, but there are also some axons who do not have the myelinated sheet. So, the gray matter are basically containing the cell bodies plus such kind of the nerves which do not have the myelinated sheets. So, it means that non-myelinated. Non-myelinated nerves. So the gray matter is one which contains the cell bodies as well as the non-myelinated sheet. So students, what we basically get that we have learned that the hemisphere outer sphere is basically the hemisphere outer layer is basically known as the cerebral cortex. That is known as what? Cerebral cortex. I don't know why it's not working. So the outer layer of the cerebral hemisphere is known as a cerebral cortex. And that is basically made up of gray matter. And this gray matter, as I told you before, this gray matter is made up of the non-myelinated sheet as well as a cell body. Beneath the cerebral cortex, there is one more layer. There is another layer just beneath the cerebral cortex, and this layer is basically known as the like you can say that white matter. The white matter is present, basically the white matter is present beneath that layer cerebral cortex, and this white matter is basically known as is basically made up of cell bodies plus an interesting thing that you have to know is that a myelinated sheet, myelinated axons. So the cerebral cortex is basically the gray matter, and beneath the cerebral cortex there is a, you can say, the white matter, and the white matter is made up of cell bodies and the myelinated axon. Basically, this cerebral cortex have the large surface area. You can see that this all cerebral cortex have enfolded itself. So it means that this all cerebral cortex has basically the large surface area which have enfolded itself and can easily be managed in the brain, in the cranium bone. So if we are going to discuss about the parts of the cerebrum, then basically the cerebrum have the four lobes: the frontal, parietal, occipital, temporal. Basically the frontal lobe is controlling the motor function, and as well as it also controlling the control of the skeletal muscle. It helps in the movement. It actually helps in the coordination actually to the movement, which is basically involved in the speech. So the function of the frontal movement is basically the frontal lobe is it's used to control the motor function, as well as it's used to control the skeletal muscle. It used to coordinate movement in the speech. The parietal function is basically it used to receive the impulses from the skin. It used to receive the sensory impulses from the skin. Occipital basically used to receive and analyze the visual information, is meant from the eyes, and the temporal is basically concerned with the hearing and the smell. So students, you can see these four lobes: temporal, frontal, parietal, and occipital. you know about the function of the frontal lobe, that it is helping in the movement, in the skeleton movement, as well as it is controlling the motor neuron, as well as it is also helping with the coordination with the speech. Whereas the parietal is basically receiving the or analyzing the information from the skin sensory, like from skin, while the occipital is involved in the vision, and the temporal is involved in the smell and the hearing. The next part of the brain is the midbrain. Basically, if we are going to discuss about the midbrain, the midbrain lies between the hindbrain and the forebrain. The midbrain is actually connecting the hindbrain and the forebrain. Basically, the midbrain used to receive the information from the hindbrain, and used to give to the specific part of the forebrain. This means that it used to receive the message from the hindbrain and used to transfer to the forebrain to a specific part. As well as the midbrain is also basically involved in controlling of some or posture, as well as it is also controlling some kind of the auditory reflexes, like the way which we used to give the reflexes after listening, hearing. So these kind of the reflexes are also under the control of the midbrain. Now let's discuss the third part, or the third, like you can say, that is a hindbrain. And that hindbrain have basically now three major parts. One is the cerebellum, other one is the pons, and the third one is the medulla oblongata. It is known as the medulla oblongata. If you're going to see that this is the cerebrum, this is basically pons, and this is the medulla oblongata. If you're going to discuss about the, you can say, like, if you're going to discuss about the medulla oblongata, then basically the medulla oblongata used to lie on the top of the spinal cord. You know that if this is the spinal cord, then on the top of the spinal cord there is the medulla oblongata, and this medulla oblongata is basically controlling the breathing, heart rate, blood pressure. It also controls many of the reflexes like vomiting, coughing, sneezing, and it also used to pass the information between the spinal cord and the rest of the brain part, or you can say that the rest of the brain passes through the medulla. So it means that the medulla is also sending the information from spinal cord to the brain. The third part is the cerebellum. The cerebellum is just behind, if you are going to see in the brain, that it is just behind to the medulla oblongata. The cerebrum is basically coordinate the muscle movement. It helps in the movement. Now the third one is a pons that is just present above to the medulla. It basically used to control the breathing. It actually helps, it assists, it's used to help to control the breathing, as well as it also helps in this connection between the cerebrum and the spinal cord. So students, if you are going to look at the brain, then you are going to get it more clearly that this is basically the spinal cord, and above to the spinal cord there is the medulla oblongata, and above to the medulla oblongata there is a pons, and just behind the medulla oblongata there is a cerebellum. So I think so you get each and everything very clearly. If you have any query, you can comment me.